Chapter 5. The Lake. Harry stood on the jetty. The water was quite deep, 6 or 7 feet. Thin weed grew on the bottom, green as salad. A shoal of tiny fish glinted in the sunlight. The sun was hot on his bare, city-white shoulders. His T-shirt and jeans, shaken free of ants, lay on the boards. If anyone came, he hoped his blue underpants would pass for swimming trunks. He looked round. The lake was ringed with trees. Grass and lichen yellow rocks ran down to the water. A small rowing boat was pulled up on the shore. Gripping the edge of the jetty with his toes, he took a deep breath and launched himself in a dive. The water felt wonderful, no salt or chlorine, fresh as a drink from the tap. Harry was an excellent swimmer. One of the medals he'd mentioned to Natty was for 1,500 metres. Another was the gold for life-saving. Floating on his back, he gazed up at the sky and felt the sun warm on his face. Doubling in a duck dive, he slid to the bed of the lake. Bubbles streamed from his mouth. Twisting like an otter, he looked all around, from the weedy pillars of the jetty to the misty blue distance. Another shoal of minnows angled in the sunlight. He thrust himself on the pebbles and emerged in a fountain of spray. A few strokes took him to the ladder. Seizing the wooden rungs, he pulled himself to the jetty. Water drained onto the hot boards, and he made a pattern of footprints. Then, hurling himself forward, he leapt out over the lake and curled into a depth charge. Spalunk! The water erupted. Spray sparkled in the sunlight. For a moment, all was confusion. Then Harry reappeared, swimming breaststroke like a frog and heading out from the shore. For 10 minutes, he played in the water, then spread-eagled himself on the jetty, arms and legs wide. The boards burned his back. His skin tickled as the drops of water ran down and dried. The sun made colours behind his eyelids. Harry squeezed them tight and watched the pale yellow darken through orange and reds to pansy purple. For a split second, he peeped at the sun, then shut his eyes and saw the splodge dissolve and change against the multicoloured background. The lakeside was quiet. He listened and missed the incessant roar of London traffic. The only sounds here were the call of the bird, the distant hum of a microlight, and soft growls from Tangle, who lay on the gravel shore and tore a stick to splinters. The heat was gorgeous. He turned on his stomach. The old boards were black and splintery, the new was smooth and creamy white, and the sun drew resin from golden knots. Harry pushed a drop with his nail, then squashed it and smelt the strong scent of pine on his fingerprint. When he tried to rub the resin away, he couldn't get rid of the stickiness. He pressed his eye to a gap and peered down at the water. Almost directly beneath him, a barred fish hung in the green shadows. A summer fly drifted into sight, struggling in the water. The saucer eyes spotted it. The angle of the fish altered, and there was a sudden swirl and splash. When the ripples stilled, the fly was gone. Harry rolled on his back again and closed his eyes. Soporific in the heat, limp as a puppet, he thought of old Goggly. Did he, like the fish, crouch motionless in the shadows, then leap out, all hairy claws and bony ribs, and snatch his victim back to devour at leisure? As he daydreamed, Harry was dimly aware of little noises in the background. A board creaked, a shadow fell over his face. Vaguely imagining that a cloud had crossed the sun, he half opened his eyes. 2 figures stood above him, towering against the sky. With a cry, Harry jumped to his feet. "It's all right," said the larger of the new arrivals, a woman. "All right. Sorry we gave you a surprise. We thought you would hear us approaching." Harry's eyes were wide. "Yeah, nasty shot that could be," said her male companion. Opened his eyes sudden and found a mountain like you standing above him. "Gaw, turn your tripes to water, that would." He turned to Harry. "Nothing to be frightened of, son. Just Dougie and old Fingers. Heard you was down at the lake. Came across to make your acquaintance like." Now that Harry was standing, he saw that far from being a giant, the man was in fact unusually short and weedy. The lined face suggested that he was in his 60s. His hair was brown and hung limply across his forehead. A wispy moustache hung raggedly over his mouth. His chin was non-existent, and non-existent shoulders sloped steeply to a thin chest, upon which a cheap brown suit hung in empty folds. You been swimming?" "Wouldn't mind a bit of that." He turned to his companion. "What about it, Uggy? Fancy stripping off a bit and taking the plunge?" He sniggered inoffensively. "Still, maybe not, eh? Want to have a bit of water left in the lake." As he spoke, Harry startled to see that various fingers were missing from each hand. He stared. Good Manners were overcome by curiosity. "What happened to your fingers?" he asked bluntly. "What happened to what?" "Your hands," he pointed. "What happened to your fingers?" "My fingers?" The man spread as if he had never really noticed that a scatter of his fingers were missing. "Oh, The suddenness of his question had caught him unawares. I had an accident, like." "An accident?" cried his huge friend. "Fun accident? 50 accident, more like." "Yeah, that's it. I was a little bit careless once or twice, at me work." He pushed the hands into flapping pockets. "That's why they call me Fingers. Fingers Peterman. Pleased to meet you." Harry looked from the hidden hands to his scrawny neck and Adam's apple, then across to his companion. "Since we're on names," said Fingers, "go on, tell him why you're called Uggy." He looked at Harry. "She's Russian, you know." "Half Russian, half German," said the woman. "Oh, this heat! I function better in the cold." Leaning on the rail, she fanned her face with a hand like a joint of lamb. Unlike Fingers, who was smaller than he had first appeared, this woman was larger. She was indeed the biggest woman that Harry had ever seen. Standing side by side, she and Fingers looked more like two ill-assorted dogs than two senior citizens. An unkempt Yorkshire Terrier beside an unusually large bulldog. For Uggy, as Fingers called her, was no beauty. Above the acreage of a good-humoured but alarming face, with splayed tombstone teeth, sat a brown rug of hair that scarcely covered the battered ears, which stood out at each side like handles. Harry's glance flitted down to her vast jumper full of tractor inner tubes and party balloons, her straining tweed skirt, and the bulging muscles of her legs above a pair of size 12 shoes. "Oh, Harry, you're so lucky," said Uggy in her guttural voice. "So young and thin. You look so cool in all this heat." "It's lovely in the water," Harry said. "Natty rigged up a ladder for me." "Yeah, if you're so hot, why don't you go in with the kid?" "It's all right for him. He'd bare his pants. What do you think it looked like if I go in my underwear?" She laughed like a jelly. "It would frighten all the fishes. They would be floating belly up over the lake, dead from shock." They joined in her laughter. "Don't you believe a word of it," said Fingers. "Spent half her life in her underwear, she has, or stripped down to a bathing suit with a strap over her shoulder, which is most the same thing." "Pay no attention to him," the woman said. "It was a long time ago." "Yeah, a famous lady wrestler she used to be," Fingers said proudly. "Uggy Bear she was called, the Strangler, the Bone Crusher." "Oh, shut up, Fingers," said Uggy, as Harry now realised she was called. "I tell you what was your job. It's too hot to go into that ancient history." Harry stared. "Were you really?" he said. "A lady wrestler like they have on the telly?" "No," she frowned. "Not like they have on the telly. They's rubbish. Most of it, anyway. I was quality, a real wrestler. Top of the bill." "Will you teach me?" Harry said. "Now I'm staying here." She shook with laughter. "All right, but not today. When it's cooler, under the trees." "Thanks." Harry was delighted. "You really want?" He nodded. "Then come here a minute." Flat-footed, she moved to the middle of the jetty. "Something I want to show you. Give me your hand." Grinning, Harry did so. He braced himself in case of a trick. Huggy smiled back. "Now, whatever happens, you must never—" What happened next was so fast that Harry was taken completely by surprise. The huge woman scarcely seemed to move, but in an instant he was flying out high over the lake, arms and legs flailing. With a tremendous splash he hit the water, metres from the jetty. A minute later he reappeared up the ladder, streaming and grinning from ear to ear. "Let anyone do that to you," Huggy concluded. She clapped him on the wet back. "Oh, your skin is so lovely and cold." "Do it again," Harry said. "No, not now," said Huggy. "It's too hot. Maybe later when—" And before he could move, Harry was flying through the air in the other direction. In a fountain he disappeared. Laughing, Huggy turned to Fingers. "Oh, the water looks so good," she said. "So cool. I think I join him. You too?" "Yeah, all right. If you're game, I am. Anything for a laugh. I go this way, you go that." Tangle stood wagging his tail. Huggy patted his wet and gravelly shoulder. "Good boy. You swim as well?" The huge ex-wrestler made her way to a clump of willow trees to strip to her formidable underwear. Half hidden behind a rocky outcrop, Fingers Peterman took off his suit and emerged in a pair of baggy undershorts, from which his legs stuck out like peeled twigs. Minutes later, 4 heads were splashing and bobbing in the lake beneath the blue summer sky.